Welcome to another edition of Conversations. I'm Andre Whitehead. In light of the recent horrific assault that took place in Pittsburgh at the Tree of Life Synagogue, we'd like to take this opportunity to present an exclusive interview and discuss hate, anti-Semitism, and the Jewish community. My guest will be Dr. Michael Gillette, who's had quite an extensive life. He's worked in politics. He served as mayor. He studied Jewish history for years and presently leads a small group of worshipers and has become an ordained rabbi. So again, we present anti-Semitism, hate, and the Jewish community. Stay tuned. Conversations begins. Dr. Gillette, I want to thank you for joining us today for this difficult situation. I wish that I was coming to see you on greater terms and maybe get something to eat, but when I first called you, I apologized for what had happened, and it's just amazing that this sort of thing continues to happen. And I remember a conversation I had with you a while back on some tragic issues, and you said, Andre, people have been doing horrible things to people for a long time.
That is true.
So anyway, thank you for this opportunity. For people who may not be familiar with you, tell us a little bit about yourself, just some brief bio, please.
Well, my name is Michael Gillette. I live in Lynchburg, Virginia. I grew up in New England. I work in the field of clinical ethics. That's my sort of full-time job. I also am very involved in the Jewish community here in Lynchburg, and I also have some experience in local politics. I had served on city council for 12 years, served 4 years as the mayor of the city, and that's probably all you need to know about me.
Yeah, and you've done some extensive research and study. Tell me about that. I do recall you traveling abroad, if you will.
You mean Jewish study?
Yes, sir.
Well, yes. I mean, my whole life I've studied, and I spent some time studying on yeshiva in Jerusalem when I was younger. I've been to Israel on a number of occasions and done some intensive language study as well as religious study. I actually worked with a group of people out of New York to study even further in order to receive smicha, that is ordination, and as I say, I've been involved in various Jewish communities throughout my whole life.
In light of the recent knowledge of this horrible act, this attack, this assault in Pittsburgh, Dr. Gillette, why is this continuing to happen?
Well, as you said, bad things have been happening in the world for a long time, and anti-Semitism is a particular manifestation of the kinds of hate crimes that we've seen, but certainly these kinds of things don't just target the Jewish community. We've had church shootings. We've had, if you remember, the Sikh place of worship was attacked several years back. So I think that we're living in an environment right now where we are in some ways emboldening people to do these sorts of things. Today was an absolutely horrendous attack. I believe as of right now, 11 people are dead. I think there are still several more in critical condition, so we don't know if that death toll is going to rise. The Anti-Defamation League, I just recently saw on the news, has basically said that in their studies, they believe this may be the single largest anti-Semitic attack in United States history. And so that certainly is significant.
What was the service or the ceremony that was taking place? What happens on a Saturday in the Jewish synagogue?
Well, the Shabbat, the Sabbath, begins on Friday evening at sunset, and it runs until Saturday evening on sunset, and that's every week. That's just the weekly Sabbath services. Many congregations will have services on a Friday night, but the congregation in Pittsburgh, I actually believe this building housed 3 separate congregations. I think sort of the umbrella organization there is a conservative synagogue, and certainly in a conservative synagogue, the bulk of your Shabbat observance would be on Saturday morning. And people would have been showing up for services. The Jewish service is very ritualized. It follows a very specific pattern, And I think that probably we're lucky that the shooter showed up as early as he did, because there are lots of introductory prayers where groups of people will begin to gather. But the larger crowds probably wouldn't show up until a little bit later after some of those introductory things had been done. So we may, I'm not sure of the timing, but what I saw in the news indicated that the shooting probably happened just a little bit before 10 in the morning. And so there certainly were a lot of people in the building, but not as many as there could have been.
Yeah. How many people generally, you said it may not have been a lot of people, how many people generally attend those types of service?
Well,
and is it like the Sunday Baptist tradition?
Well, I mean, congregations come in all different sizes.
Yeah.
According to Jewish tradition, in order to hold a complete service, you have to have a minimum number of people, which is a minyan. It's a quorum, if you will, of 10 individuals. But I believe that this congregation was much larger. I think that this congregation probably had, 150 families. So there were hundreds of members of that particular organization. And I just don't know that synagogue well enough to know what the average attendance would be on a Shabbat morning.
You know, the president talked about having armed guards at facilities, at churches, at synagogues. What do you think about that? Is he on to something? Is that just because of the times that we're in? Is it necessary? Or will that hinder the spirit or the service, if you will?
Security in synagogues has increased. I remember I was president of the synagogue here in town when 9/11 happened. And I remember that right after that, we had the High Holy Days, Yom Kippur, Rosh Hashanah. And we actually had police presence outside the building. There was a heightened concern that there could be a security risk. A lot of synagogues have added panic buttons so that someone who's running services and sort of is looking out, the bima is sort of the stage, I guess you'd call it, sort of up in the front, and the rabbi and the cantor would usually be up there looking down on the congregation. A shooter would probably come in through the back, so the people sitting in the rows wouldn't necessarily see that, but someone sitting in the front could. So I know that many synagogues have installed panic buttons up on the bima so that you could quickly call for help. There's been a concerted effort that the Jewish Federations of North America have put in place to help educate Jewish communities on what they can do to increase security. Having one single armed person there as an armed guard, I don't think would have made any difference in this particular case, because I think this shooter went in with clear intent. And I think the first thing he would have done would have been to take out the guard, and it wouldn't have been hard for him to do it. So, I don't know that would have made a difference in this case. Would it create a deterrence generally? Hard to say. I have visited and prayed in synagogues all over the world. When I travel, I like to go and meet up with the Jewish community in a local place. And I can tell you that when I have gone to synagogues in France or Belgium, for instance, those are two countries where anti-Semitism is a significant problem. You can't just show up on a Friday night or a Saturday morning and be let in. The doors are locked. There's a security presence. I have gone out of my way in advance of the Sabbath to go to the office when I know someone would be in the office, introduce myself, tell them I'm visiting from out of town. I'd really like to come to services, so that they'll let me in. So it's unfortunate, because you want a place of worship to be open and you want people to feel comfortable, coming in and sort of joining in. But I certainly have been in synagogues around the world where security is pretty tight.
I've talked to pastors of churches, and they have said that they would feel uncomfortable to have an armed guard, or even someone, a deacon, if you will, having a pistol. If you're in a synagogue, would you feel uncomfortable to look to your left, look to your right, and one of your fellow worshipers is armed?
Look, I don't want to get into a conversation about gun control and so on, but I will tell you that an average person who just happens to have a pistol on their hip is not going to be able to manage a situation like this. If you notice the kind of response that you saw from law enforcement, you recognize very quickly that if you don't have proper training in the use of weapons, if you don't drill on that training repeatedly and over time, I mean, our police officers, our soldiers, they don't just learn how to use a gun and then walk around with it. They are constantly training, and they are constantly sharpening their skills, and they're keeping they're keeping their training up to par. Just having people carrying pistols is not I don't know what kind of shot you are. I don't know if you're going to be able to tell the good guy from the bad guy, and that's not an answer. A trained security person is different than an average Joe who just likes carrying a weapon. So I don't know that it's an answer to arm everybody. There's an additional problem in Jewish law, which is that it would be prohibited to carry a firearm on the Sabbath. Now, Jewish law also states that you can break any Jewish law in order to save a human life. So if you knew that there were a specific threat, then you might be able to carry a firearm on Shabbat for that reason. But just generally carrying a firearm on the Sabbath is not even consistent with basic Jewish law. So I just don't think it's not a question of just arming everybody who happens to be sitting in the congregation.
Coming up next, Dr. Gillette, define anti-Semitism for me. Some may see that as an easy question, but I've talked to other people in the Jewish faith, and they talked about how complex that is. Can you give us a definition?
Well, anti-Semitism is complex.
Following your dreams takes passion, commitment, and preparation.
He's 50 meters away. To neck and neck. 10 meters left and he's in the lead. He's done it! He's won the race! Unbelievable!
You train and work hard to make that dream come true. But what if being able to chase your dreams is beyond your control? Water scarcity is a problem that affects millions of rural poor in Asia every single day. To them, clean water is luxury, but it shouldn't be. Sign up to be part of the generation that changes this at lienaid.org/waterisluxury.
The skills you develop as a soldier in the Army National Guard can give you a head start on your career. Gain practical experience with technology and equipment that will give you a leg up in the civilian world. Learn critical leadership skills and to be part of a team. Serve your community and your country part-time while earning money for an education. Visit NationalGuard.com to learn about the paid training and career opportunities available to you in the Army National Guard.
Dr. Gillette, define anti-Semitism for me. Some may see that as an easy question, but I've talked to other people in the Jewish faith, and they talked about how complex that is. Can you give us a definition?
Well, anti-Semitism is complex, and I mean, at its core, it is, an unjust prejudice, like you would have many other unjust prejudices. You deal with racism and sexism and so on, and anti-Semitism to some degree is a form of racism. What makes it complex, though, is that anti-Semitism has a lot of different facets, and and anti-Semitism can be expressed in different ways, and historically it has been expressed in different ways. So, for instance, you could talk about religious anti-Semitism. So, for instance, people who would argue that Jews as a group bear guilt for the killing of Jesus. That has been a form of religious anti-Semitism, of a prejudice that has been carried through for centuries. You can have sort of economic anti-Semitism. I think the statistics now show that even in the United States, even in 2018, as close to 20%, I think it's 19% of Americans still believe that Jews control Wall Street. And so there are stereotypes about Jews, and that sort of bleeds over into social anti-Semitism. Jews are greedy, Jews are vulgar, Jews are, that there's a Jewish conspiracy to control politics. So anti-Semitism gets expressed in a lot of different ways: religious ways, social ways, economic ways. Certainly there has been throughout history very straightforward exclusionary ways. Jews have been expelled from just about every country on the planet at one point or another, have been denied citizenship, so anti-Semitism can be expressed in a lot of different ways. There is racial anti-Semitism. I mean, the Nazis really wanted to define Judaism as a race and went through great pains to try to show what that looked like in order to claim that there was some sort of either inherent inferiority of Jews, or simultaneously or seemingly in contradiction, some sort of inherent talent for obstructing appropriate social commerce and sort of that conspiracy theory. So anti-Semitism has expressed itself for thousands of years in a lot of different ways.
Coming up next, when it comes to this issue at hand, attacks on Jewish synagogues and Jewish people, how can we as a community come together? And some people said, well, you're dreaming about this coming together stuff. People talk about it. And this is just the sign of the times. On a sidebar, people are just so amazed that we encounter acts like this today. How does it end?
I'm not amazed at all.
Tell me, what is a normal day like in the cottage? What do you guys do? Go through a whole day.
We gotta get up and we gotta do our chores, like we gotta clean the whole house before we go to school.
I have the front sitting room, and I don't like the bathrooms or the kitchen because it's nasty.
First thing, when we get off the bus, she'll tell us to put our book bags down. We'll get a snack, come back outside, ride bikes, toss football, play with the other cottages.
We like to play baseball and football, and we sometimes like climb the trees and dodgeball.
We'll come in, do study hall, and then we'll have 2 people help make dinner while everybody else is doing Xbox or computer and Wii. And after that, the people who help with dinner get on Xbox, computer, and Wii. And around 8-ish, we'll do showers. And then around 9, the little boys go to bed, and the rest of us can stay up till 10.
I like how the rooms are upstairs because the teenagers are with the teen, and then the little boys are with the little boys. And I like my roommates are Charlie and Malcolm, and they're like my best friends, and we have a good time.
One thing I do not like about them, they are a little bit too messy.
Character development is like teaching us about character, like peace, justice, respect, and things like that. It teaches us like people who did justice.
What do you think of Patrick Henry? What type of place is it?
I think it's good for kids to go. It's fun here. We do a lot of stuff.
You have like chores that you need to do around the house, and you need to do your own laundry, and it's kind of more fun though because you go more places.
I learned how to start talking and stuff because when I first came here, I was really shy. And my grades got better. Yeah, and it changed my life around.
When it comes to this issue at hand, attacks on Jewish synagogues and Jewish people, how can we as a community come together? And some people said, well, you're dreaming about this coming together stuff. People talk about it, and this is just the sign of the times. On a sidebar, People are just so amazed that we encounter acts like this today. How does it end?
I'm not amazed at all that we encounter acts like this. I think
Shouldn't we get better? Shouldn't we be getting better as we go?
We should, and I think that over the longer span of history, if you certainly take the long view, I think we are getting better. But improvement is not a straight line up. Improvement has dips, and we see ups and we see downs. And I think that our national discourse at this point is at an ebb. I think that we have grown accustomed to, and I think we've even in some ways aggrandized and glamorized shocking speech and belittling language, that we talk about people with whom we disagree in dehumanizing terms. We want to say, it's just political correctness, and so the rowdier I can possibly be, the bigger the shock value, the better my rhetoric. And I think that's created an environment where it's not everyone, and it's not a majority of people. It's a fringe minority, but it's a fringe minority that can be easily activated and do some pretty nasty things. I think social media, to some degree, has created an opportunity for people to create echo chambers that magnify these tendencies. So I think that there are a number of things that contribute to this. I don't think it's a sign that somehow our society is crumbling and that we're not making progress as a nation and even as a world. But we're in a period of retrenchment right now. We're seeing much harder nationalistic language. We are seeing people being rewarded for shocking value, and I'm not pointing fingers at any particular political party or at this point even at any particular politician. I would just say that our discourse has become markedly less civil. And I don't think we need to come together in the sense of we all have to believe the same things or agree on the same points, or that's not what the kind of coming together we need. We need to be able to embrace each other even though we're different from one another. We need to be able to celebrate our diversity. We need to be able to disagree and have robust arguments and debates, but somehow not think that the person with whom you're debating is subhuman because they don't adopt your point of view. And I think there are reasons how in the United States we've gotten here, and they're reasons that have been built up over decades now.
Such as?
Gerrymandering. I think we have created a political system where in order to make it through a primary, you need to speak to the extremes in your own party. And we have disincentivized people to move to the middle. I think gerrymandering, which has been done very intentionally by both political parties when they are in power to protect, incumbencies, has created an environment where the successful politician will be the extreme politician. You never have to speak to the middle. Everybody always says, well, you run to the left and you run to the right during the primaries, but then, during the generals, you have to sort of race to the middle. Well, less and less are we racing to the middle, and the influence of that pushing to the margins is becoming more pronounced, so that even if we do sort of pivot back towards the center, we're pivoting from more and more extreme, divergent views, and I think that we've now recognized that sort of extreme language works, and it puts you in power. And then when you're in power, you use your power to keep your power, which means that you further gerrymander and you appeal to your narrower and narrower your base more and more. And that's just it has created a feedback loop, I think, that is extraordinarily dangerous, and we're feeling its reverberations now, not just in our political discourse, but in all of our social discourse, our ability to be human together, our ability to share across all sorts of demographic lines. We have engendered a politics of hate in this country. And that's why when you asked me before about armed guards or arming people, and my answer was I don't want to talk about gun control and that sort of stuff. because I think it's deeper than that. It's not a gun problem, and it's definitely not a mental health problem. It drives me crazy when everybody says, it's a mental health problem. People.
This guy was a sicko.
Well, you know what? People with serious mental illness are far more likely to be victims of crime than perpetrators of crime. What you've got here are violent people who are getting reinforcement in their extremist views, and it is a small minority, but they're getting that reinforcement and they're feeling empowered by the environment. That's a dangerous thing. It's not a gun culture. It's not a mental health problem. You know what it is? It's a culture of violence. And when I say violence, I do mean, but not, I don't restrict that to physical violence. I think that hate speech is a form of violence. I think that disrespect one person to another is a form of violence. When we count up, say, let's go back to anti-Semitism, we were heading in the right direction on all the stats in the early 2000s. And the ADL keeps these figures, and they've been doing it for some time now. 2017 saw a 57% increase in acts of anti-Semitism in this country. Now, some handful of those are actual physical acts of violence, people getting beat up, etc. But the bulk of those are vandalism of synagogues and Jewish cemeteries, hate speech, online harassment with clearly anti-Semitic memes that are tweeted out. Every one of those things contributes to a culture of meanness that unfortunately most people will never become physically violent, but it's becoming common enough that those very few people who will become physically violent are feeling permission to become violent. I mean, it's a sad state of affairs. I don't know that it's worse than it's ever been. 2017 was the second worst year on record with anti-Semitism, acts of anti-Semitism recorded in this country.
Coming up next, how do you rationalize, what message would you say to the individual who says, I have a right to free speech. I have a right to be vocal and not so politically correct, and in turn help them understand that this kind of rhetoric could be harmful.
You have to understand that this whole notion of political correctness has been so misdefined and then misattacked and then misdefined and misdefended. Look, if political correctness just means that you're not allowed to ask the hard questions, then political correctness is a bad thing.
Do you know what smoking and cigarettes do to the inside of your body?
It hurts your body. Smoke and cigarettes can hurt your lungs.
It hurts your throat.
It hurts lots of other parts too.
It makes you more likely to get heart disease and lung disease.
It increases your risk for a heart attack or stroke.
And on the outside, it really just stinks.
Your clothes smell, your breath is gross, and your teeth get yellow.
Hello, do you hear what we're saying?
Do you hear what we're saying?
Do you hear what we're saying?
Smoking isn't cool.
It's not cool at all.
And it can kill you. And you won't start smoking for yourself. Just do it for me.
And me.
And me.
And me.
And me.
And us.
Soldiers in the Army National Guard serve to give back to their country and communities. Their part-time commitment qualifies them for an array of benefits, such as affordable health and life insurance benefits, education benefits, including tuition assistance, student loan repayment and GI Bill programs, a retirement plan based on part-time service, and VA home mortgages. Visit NationalGuard.com to learn more about all the benefits available in the Army National Guard.
There was a time when I battled with the best, met with the meanest, trained with the toughest, did things you can only dream of. But now the untraveled world still gleams. The distant horizon beckons. Maybe I'll stumble, never to recover. Made weak by time and fate, but still strong in will. To strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. But I will fight it when I wake. I will fight it on the endless road ahead, whatever the cost may be. I will never surrender. I will come back. I will come back strong.
How do you rationalize, what message would you say to the individual who says, I have a right to free speech. I have a right to be vocal and not so politically correct, and in turn help them understand that this kind of rhetoric could be harmful?
You have to understand that this whole notion of political correctness has been so misdefined and then misattacked and then misdefined and misdefended. Look, if political correctness just means that you're not allowed to ask the hard questions, then political correctness is a bad thing. And we have to get past that. But that's not what we mean. That's a nice sort of straw man version of political correctness, if you will. And if that's what you mean, I agree with you. Then political correctness is dangerous. We shouldn't have it. But saying that that you need to be able to talk about the hard topics and say tough things, that is, I mean, deal with difficult issues, and that you can't be gagged from that, I agree with that. It doesn't give you permission to be nasty. It doesn't give you permission to be uncivil. It doesn't give you the permission to use dehumanizing terms when you describe the people with whom you disagree, to reduce people to animals, and to think of them in those sorts of terms. Whether you mean it literally or not, it's dangerous. It's dangerous. So if political correctness means be civil, sure, have a vigorous argument, but no ad hominem arguments. Don't attack the people, attack the positions. Well, if that's political correctness, I'm all for it. If you think political correctness means you're not allowed to say anything that might offend somebody, then I'm not for it. Let's just get past these labels, because that's another thing that's happening in politics, is that people are going to use these terms in ways that advance their agendas. Let's just say what we mean and quit with the handles already, okay? We need to be able to have difficult conversations. We need to be able to reveal uncomfortable truths. We cannot be shy about admitting what exists. And sometimes people will be upset by what they hear, and that's okay. But that doesn't mean that you should be nasty. It doesn't mean you get to dehumanize people. It doesn't mean that you get to belittle the people with whom you're debating. It means that you should have an honest, respectful debate. Now, you figure out how you want to define political correctness, and I'll tell you whether or not it's a good thing or a bad thing.
You mentioned politics in those remarks, and I just can see people watching us now, and we get it all the time. People will call in or put posts out on social media. It's on both sides. Republicans are doing it. Democrats are doing it. So for those who say it's on both sides, and almost use that as some kind of legitimate reason why to continue, you say what?
I think that's like saying, well, since there are murders in the world, you might as well murder. Since there are thieves in the world, you might as well be a thief. I mean, I'll condemn it wherever it comes from. I am not happy with party politics in this country, for all the reasons I've already mentioned. I do not want to identify with one party or another. You know me. We've had conversations. You know what my views are on particular issues, and you could very easily pigeonhole me as being in one party or another, and I'm sure you know where you would put me. But the bottom line is that what I believe on particular issues, I will not let that define me as being a party animal who puts party before ethics. So you and I can disagree on particular issues, and you may think I'm to the left, you may think I'm to the right, you may, whatever it might be. But our system that somehow thinks that you need to pick a team and then be a team player, I think is dangerous. I just don't like it. I will caucus with one side or the other, but I am going to declare myself to be an independent. I am just not going to play that game.
Coming up next, for those who see these bad acts happening to Jewish people, what should they know? What should we know about Jewish people, Jewish faith? Is there something that the general population is missing and maybe they don't understand? And I'm looking back at other cultures that we've talked to people about, and they say, well, people just don't understand us, quote unquote. Is there something that people are missing about
Well,
it?
I think that's sort of an interesting question, and in some ways it's sort of a dangerous question because
The skills you develop as a soldier in the Army National Guard can give you a head start on your career. Gain practical experience with technology and equipment that will give you a leg up in the civilian world. Learn critical leadership skills and to be part of a team. Serve your community and your country part-time while earning money for an education. Visit NationalGuard.com to learn about the paid training and career opportunities available to you in the Army National Guard.
You are the best protection she has. Buddy up. I'm Jill Harrington. Please visit HelpSaveTheNextGirl.com and get involved.
Speeding kills. Had he been traveling 10 kilometers an hour less, he would have stopped 19 meters earlier. Don't speed. It's not worth a life.
Do you know what smoking and cigarettes do to the inside of your body?
It hurts your body. Smoke and cigarettes can hurt your lungs.
It hurts your throat.
It hurts lots of other parts too.
It makes you more likely to get heart disease and lung disease.
It increases your risk for a heart attack or stroke.
And on the outside, it really just stinks.
Your clothes smell, your breath is gross, and your teeth get yellow. Hello, do you hear what we're saying?
Do you hear what we're saying?
Do you hear what we're saying?
Smoking isn't cool.
It's not cool at all.
And it can kill you. Hey, you won't start smoking for yourself. Just do it for me.
And me.
And me.
And me.
And me.
And us.
for those who see these bad acts happening to Jewish people, what should they know? What should we know about Jewish people, Jewish faith? Is there something that the general population is missing and maybe they don't understand? And I'm looking back at other cultures that we've talked to people about, and they say, well, people just don't understand us, quote unquote. Is there something that people are missing about
Well,
it?
I think that's sort of an interesting question, and in some ways it's sort of a dangerous question because Jews are not monolithic. I mean, and I also want to say this. The vast majority of Americans are not anti-Semitic. I mean, being a Jew in the United States of America in the 21st century is probably the safest environment that Jews have lived in ever, anywhere. And it would be a mistake to sort of, allow some hysteria to make us think that somehow, we're in a bad place. Having said that, that doesn't mean it's entirely safe, and it doesn't mean that we're not in a position where we could easily see a slide. I mean, there were German Jewish soldiers who had gotten medals of honor from the German army in World War I, who never possibly could have believed that they would have been ostracized or victimized by their own communities, that they were veterans. And then between World War I and World War II, you saw what happened. So we can't be complacent. We certainly could slide in a bad direction. Bad things could definitely happen. But most Americans are not anti-Semitic. And we need to reach out across religious diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, demographic diversity, to recognize that people are people. And there are going to be Jews who are very, very religious in a very sort of orthodox way. There are going to be Jews who are very sort of religiously liberal. There are going to be Jews who disagree with each other on political matters. One thing really bothers me about politics right now. Let's take a completely different topic. Let's talk about the LGBTQ community. I am embarrassed for politicians, and I've heard it I don't know how many times, who have said, well, I was against gay marriage, and then one of my children came out to me and said, well, Dad, I'm gay, or I'm a lesbian. And then I, of course, this, that, or the other thing. Really? Like you're telling me that you couldn't just sort of see outside your own box until it was your own family member who had to knock you over the head with this stuff? I think the same thing is true with any prejudice that there is. Really? Like you want to tell me that you can't, that you're going to be anti-Semitic until you have a Jewish friend? Or that you'll be racist until, well, some of my best friends are African Americans, so now I understand what that means? Come on, people. We can think more broadly than that. We can break out of our own worldviews a little bit. We can imagine what it's like to be someone different than us. And I think that's all it takes. I can imagine what it's like to hold a view with which I personally disagree. It doesn't mean I have to necessarily change my mind and hold that view. But I can imagine a rational, reasonable person holding that view. So why do I have to hate that person? Why do I have to belittle that person? Why do I think that person is somehow stupid or subhuman? So what do people need to know about Jews in order to not be anti-Semitic? Jews are human beings. And that's going to work for any ism you got out there.
Coming up next, well, I want to thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Gillette. And you and I have had heated conversations, good conversations over the years, and I've always appreciated your candor. As we exit this time, what would be your final word on the Jewish faith, the Jewish community, unity, and these horrible things that happen?
It's not. I am, of course, pained to see this happening in the Jewish community of which I am a part, and so you maybe feel that more acutely. But But I am just as pained to see hate crimes in any of these other manifestations.
What does love have to do with it anyway? Only everything. Love makes you think you can do things. Like make wine where grapes have never grown. Love's too big for four walls to hold. Love is one voice that speaks to us all. Love says go your own way, fiercely, totally, truly. Because love is the start of everything, then and now. And love is here, just waiting for you to find it.
You are the best protection she has. Buddy up. I'm Jill Harrington. Please visit helpsavethenextgirl.com and get involved.
Well, I want to thank you for this opportunity, Dr. Gillette. And, you and I have had heated conversations, good conversations over the years, and I've always appreciated your candor. As we exit this time, what would be your final word on the Jewish faith, the Jewish community, unity, and these horrible things that happen?
It's not... I am, of course, pained to see this happening in the Jewish community of which I am a part, and so you maybe feel that more acutely. But I am just as pained to see hate crimes in any of these other manifestations. Every time something like this happens, as you say, we've had some animated conversations, and we've always had fun together. And you know that in politics, I often have made my points as strenuously as I can, because I'm trying to argue for a point of view. And whenever something like this happens, I always sort of become self-critical, and I always say to myself, Mike, you could have said that nicer. Maybe I know that you didn't feel it that way, but someone from the outside looking at you might have felt that you sounded angry, or you sounded, upset, or whatever it might be. And so every time something like this happens, I get self-critical, and I think to myself, all right, what am I going to do to remind myself to dial it back a notch, to pick my words carefully, to think about how I might appear to somebody else, so that I might not even inadvertently be feeding a tendency that, as I've said, for the vast majority of people, never gets out of hand. It's just healthy excitement. We all have emotions. But I want to ask myself, what am I doing that maybe even inadvertently is contributing to an environment where those few fringe people feel emboldened and empowered to act on their worst and basest of intuitions and motives? And I think that, and I'm guilty. I mean, I admit, I get excited, and so I need to constantly try to pull myself back. But I think that if everybody just did that a little bit, and just asked, okay, how could I rephrase this so that it could not be misused? Even though I didn't intend it badly, how might what I say be misused? And let me defend against that a little bit. I think we'd be in a much better place.
Will you do more versus your reflective things internally? Will you do more publicly, maybe speaking out more So many people know or respect you. Should you or will you go out and maybe do more lectures? And
if I'm invited, I will. But if the opportunity raises itself, I'll certainly be open to that. Let me end by giving you a little lesson in it. And you're coming to talk to me because I'm Jewish, and this conversation obviously has gone far afield to all sorts of things. Let me share with you a little lesson, a Jewish lesson. And it actually was in one of the sermons. I used it as a piece of one of the sermons I wrote for the High Holy Days just this past year. One of the commandments in the Torah, one of the 613 mitzvot, the commandments that exist in the first 5 books of Moses, is that thou shalt not put a stumbling block before the blind. Now, we have to ask ourselves, who would play such a dirty trick? Is the Torah really telling us, literally, like, don't trip blind people because, like, it's not funny? I mean, that really? And the rabbis talked about that. Do not put a stumbling block before the blind. And one of the interpretations that's in the Talmud, and one of the rabbinical interpretations, if you read the commentaries on the Torah, is that people can be blinded in a lot of ways. And one way that we get blinded is when our emotions carry us away. And we can whip ourselves up into a frenzy. And then we can do some things that are not appropriate. And what the Torah is telling us is that if you use someone's emotional blindness, if you whip someone up into a frenzy and you get them to the point where they're going to do something inappropriate, that's a violation of the commandment. You are putting a stumbling block before the blind. You are capitalizing on their blindness, not their physical blindness. You're capitalizing on their emotional vulnerability in a way that intentionally trips them up. And that's immoral. That is wrong. And the Torah clearly says, don't do it. And that may be, at times like these, one of the most important lessons we can learn from the Torah is don't capitalize on people's moral or emotional blindness to encourage them to act